The sirens pierced through the morning calm like daggers through silk. Red and blue lights painted frantic shadows across the marble facade of Unity Community Bank, where hundreds of panicked customers pressed against police barriers, waving bank statements and shouting demands. "I want my money now!" screamed an elderly woman, clutching her purse. "They said it's all gone." The crowd surged forward, a tide of fear and fury that threatened to crush anyone caught between desperation and the building's locked doors. Detective Maria Rodriguez stepped out of her squad car, surveying the chaos with practiced eyes. In 12 years on the force, she'd seen bank robberies, hostage situations, even a terrorist threat, but never a scene quite like this. The caller had been specific, insistent. "Money laundering," the woman had said, her voice tight with righteous anger. "Millions of dollars. Drug cartels. It's all connected. I have proof." That was 6 hours ago. Now, as Rodriguez watched federal agents stream through the bank's entrance, while news vans multiplied like breeding rabbits along the street, she wondered if she was witnessing the beginning of something much larger than a simple fraud investigation. 3 months earlier, on a crisp October morning that carried the promise of new beginnings, Marcus Washington had stood before the same building with very different emotions coursing through his chest. Pride, excitement, the weight of history pressing gently on his shoulders. Unity Community Bank was about to become the first Black-owned bank in the state's history, and Marcus, along with his business partner Sarah Chen, had spent 5 years making this dream a reality. "Can you believe we actually did it?" Sarah asked, adjusting her blazer as they watched the installation crew mount the gleaming bronze sign above the entrance. Her voice carried a mixture of wonder and exhaustion that Marcus recognized in his own reflection every morning. "Sometimes I think I'm going to wake up and find out this was all a dream," Marcus replied, his hand instinctively reaching for the business plan folder he'd carried everywhere for the past 18 months. Even now, with the keys to the building in his pocket and employees already at work inside, part of him couldn't quite believe it was real. The bank had opened its doors with modest fanfare, but genuine community support. Local businesses shifted their accounts. Families who had never felt truly welcome at the larger corporate institutions found a home here. Marcus and Sarah had built something more than a financial institution. They'd created a symbol of possibility, a tangible representation of what could be achieved when vision met determination. For 11 weeks, everything had proceeded according to plan. Deposits grew steadily. Loans were approved with the kind of personal attention that had vanished from modern banking. The community responded with enthusiasm that exceeded even Marcus's optimistic projections. Unity Community Bank wasn't just succeeding, it was thriving. Then came Tuesday morning, January 15th, and Karen Whitmore. Karen swept through the bank's front doors with the confidence of someone accustomed to having her way. At 52, she possessed the particular brand of entitlement that comes from decades of never being told no. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her designer handbag swung with the rhythm of someone on a mission. "I need to speak with the manager," she announced to Tamika, the young teller who had the misfortune of being stationed at the front desk. "Immediately." Tamika, trained to handle difficult customers with grace, smiled warmly. "Of course, ma'am. May I ask what this is regarding?" "I'm here about a loan application," Karen said, her voice carrying the edge of barely contained irritation. "I submitted my paperwork 3 weeks ago, and I haven't heard anything back. This is completely unacceptable." Marcus emerged from his office, having overheard the conversation. He'd been expecting this moment for 3 weeks, ever since Karen's application had crossed his desk. The numbers simply didn't work. Her credit score was marginal. Her debt-to-income ratio was problematic. And the business plan she'd submitted for her proposed boutique was Frankly, unrealistic. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, extending his hand with professional courtesy. "I'm Marcus Washington, the bank president. I was actually planning to call you this afternoon." Karen's eyes narrowed as she took in Marcus's appearance. Her handshake was brief, perfunctory. "Well, you can save yourself the phone call. I'm here now, and I want answers." "Of course. Would you like to step into my office where we can discuss this privately?" The walk to Marcus's office was short, but Karen used every step to catalog her surroundings with the sharp attention of someone looking for flaws. The modern decor, the diverse staff, the community photos lining the walls, everything seemed to confirm something in her mind, though Marcus couldn't yet decipher what. Once seated across from Marcus's desk, Karen crossed her arms and leaned back in her chair. "So, my loan." Marcus had handled hundreds of these conversations over his banking career. The key was honesty, delivered with empathy. "Ms. Whitmore, I've reviewed your application thoroughly, and I'm afraid we won't be able to approve the loan at this time." The silence that followed stretched between them like a taut wire. Karen's face remained expressionless, but something dangerous flickered behind her eyes. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" "Based on your current financial profile and the business plan you submitted, we don't feel we can responsibly approve this loan. However, I'd be happy to discuss some steps you could take to strengthen your application for future consideration." Karen's laugh was sharp, humorless. "You've got to be kidding me. Do you have any idea who I am, who my family is in this community?" Marcus kept his voice level, professional. "Ms. Whitmore, our lending decisions are based on financial criteria, not personal connections. We have a responsibility to both our depositors and our borrowers to make sound lending decisions." Sound lending decisions. Karen's voice rose sharply. "You mean like all those loans you've been approving for people in the Riverside neighborhood? I've heard about those. People with no credit history, no collateral, getting approved for amounts I can't even get approved for." Marcus felt a familiar tension begin to coil in his stomach. This conversation was taking a turn he'd hoped to avoid. Every loan application is evaluated individually based on the same criteria, regardless of the applicant's background or neighborhood. "Oh, please." Karen stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Let's not pretend this isn't about race. You people stick together, don't you? Take care of your own—" The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Marcus remained seated, his hands folded calmly on his desk, though every muscle in his body had tensed. "Ms. Whitmore, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. If you'd like to file a formal complaint about our lending practices, you can contact our customer service department, or you're always welcome to reach out to banking regulators." Karen leaned forward, her palms flat on Marcus's desk. "Oh, I'll be filing complaints. All right. But not with customer service. I know exactly who to call about what's really going on here." She straightened, grabbed her purse, and stalked toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back, and Marcus saw something in her expression that sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't just anger. It was the look of someone who had decided to go to war. "You people think you can come into our community and just take over," she said, her voice now eerily calm. "But I see what this really is, and I'm going to make sure everyone else sees it too." The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the picture frames on Marcus's wall. He sat in the sudden silence, staring at the spot where she'd stood, trying to process what had just happened. In all his years in banking, he'd never encountered anything quite like that level of venom. He reached for his phone to call Sarah, then hesitated. Maybe it was better to let Karen cool off. Maybe she'd realize how inappropriate her behavior had been and simply find another bank for her loan needs. It was a decision he would regret for the rest of his life. Karen sat in her BMW for 10 minutes after leaving the bank, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The rage that had sustained her through the confrontation with Marcus was transforming into something colder, more calculated. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her contacts, her mind racing through possibilities. The first call went to her brother-in-law, Detective Bob Hendricks. No answer. The second went to her neighbor, City Councilman Richard Steele. Voicemail. The third went to her tennis partner, whose husband worked for the State Banking Commission. Nothing. Finally, she dialed 911. 911. What's your emergency? Karen took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice carried the perfect mixture of urgency and civic responsibility. I need to report suspicious financial activity. Money laundering. I have evidence of massive fraud at Unity Community Bank on 5th Street. The dispatcher's tone sharpened. Ma'am, are you reporting a crime in progress? I'm reporting an ongoing criminal enterprise, Karen said, the lies flowing with surprising ease. I've seen documents, cash transfers, meetings with people who clearly aren't legitimate customers. This bank is a front for drug money, and I have proof. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to provide your name and contact information, and I'll have an officer meet with you to take a statement. Karen smiled for the first time since entering the bank that morning. My name is Karen Whitmore, and I'm prepared to provide a full statement. But you need to act quickly. They're processing fraudulent transactions right now. Every minute you wait, more money disappears. What happened next moved with the inexorable logic of an avalanche. Karen's call triggered an automatic notification to the Financial Crimes Task Force. Within 30 minutes, federal agents were reviewing her claims. Within 2 hours, they were seeking emergency warrants. Within 4 hours, Unity Community Bank was swarming with investigators, and Marcus Washington was standing in handcuffs in his own lobby, watching his dream collapse around him. The media arrived faster than the agents. By noon, news vans lined the street. By 2 o'clock, the story had gone national. Federal investigation targets minority-owned bank scrolled across cable news tickers, followed by speculation about money laundering, drug cartels, and financial fraud. Sarah Chen arrived at the bank to find police tape across the entrance, and Marcus sitting in the back of a federal van, still in handcuffs. She tried to approach, but Agent Jennifer Walsh intercepted her with professional efficiency. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back. This is an active crime scene. Crime scene. Sarah's voice cracked. This is my bank. I'm the co-owner. What's happening here? Agent Walsh studied Sarah with the calculating gaze of someone trained to spot deception. We're executing search warrants related to alleged money laundering activities. Are you Sarah Chen? Yes, but there's been some kind of mistake. We run a legitimate community bank. We've never... Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me for questioning. As Sarah was led away, she caught Marcus's eye through the van's rear window. The look they shared contained 5 years of partnership, shared dreams, and the dawning realization that everything they'd built was crumbling in real time. The bank run began at 4:17 that afternoon. When the first news report aired on local television, Mrs. Henderson, who had transferred her life savings to Unity Community Bank just 6 weeks earlier, saw the footage of federal agents carrying boxes of documents from the building and immediately drove to the nearest branch of her old bank. "I need to wire all my money out of Unity Community Bank," she told the teller, her hands shaking as she filled out the transfer forms. "Right now. All of it." Mrs. Henderson's panic was infectious. Within an hour, Unity Community Bank's phone lines were jammed with customers demanding explanations, demanding transfers, demanding immediate access to their funds. By evening, social media was alive with rumors, speculation, and fear. The story took on a life of its own, growing more dramatic with each retelling. Unity Community Bank wasn't just under investigation. It was a criminal enterprise. The owners weren't just suspected of fraud. They were cartel operatives. The deposits weren't just frozen. They were gone forever. By Wednesday morning, a crowd had gathered outside the bank's main branch. By noon, that crowd had become a mob. Detective Rodriguez arrived to find nearly 300 people pressing against police barriers, many of them elderly customers who had entrusted their life savings to the bank. "Please, I just need to know my money is safe," pleaded an elderly man clutching a withdrawal slip. "That's all my wife and I have left." Rodriguez had seen the investigation files. She'd read Karen Whitmore's statement, studied the evidence, watched the federal agents work with the methodical precision that suggested they'd found something real. But looking at the crowd, seeing the genuine fear in these people's faces, she began to wonder if they were all missing something important. The markets opened Thursday morning to chaos. Unity Community Bank's parent company, Unity Financial Holdings, saw its stock price plummet 70% in the first hour of trading. But the panic didn't stop there. Investors began questioning other minority-owned financial institutions. Was this part of a broader pattern? Were these banks being used systematically for money laundering? Within hours, 3 other black-owned banks across the country reported suspicious withdrawals and federal inquiries. The contagion was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated, and Wall Street was beginning to take notice. Senator Patricia Williams, who had championed legislation supporting minority-owned banks, called for an emergency hearing. "We cannot allow a single investigation to destroy decades of progress in community banking," she declared in a hastily arranged press conference. "These institutions serve communities that have been historically underserved by traditional banks." But her words were drowned out by the growing chorus of voices demanding accountability. Conservative talk radio seized on the story as evidence of affirmative action gone wrong. Liberal commentators warned about racial profiling in financial investigations. The story had transcended banking and become a symbol of everything divisive in American society. Marcus Washington sat in a federal holding cell, trying to make sense of how his life had disintegrated so completely in just 72 hours. His lawyer, David Kim, had been frank about the situation. "The evidence against you is largely circumstantial, but it's voluminous. Someone provided detailed documentation of alleged suspicious transactions, and the pattern looks convincing to investigators." "But it's all fake," Marcus insisted. "Every transaction they're questioning. I can explain. We have records, documentation, legitimate business reasons for every deposit and withdrawal." David nodded grimly. "I believe you. But someone went to extraordinary lengths to make this look real. The question is who and why?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Tamika, the young teller who had first encountered Karen Whitmore, had been watching the news coverage with growing unease. Something about Karen's behavior that Tuesday morning had stuck with her. The woman had seemed prepared for confrontation, almost excited by the prospect of conflict. On Friday afternoon, Tamika called Agent Walsh. "I think you need to look more closely at the woman who made the initial complaint," she said. Something wasn't right about her that day. Agent Walsh had been having similar doubts. The evidence Karen had provided was almost too perfect, too neatly packaged. Financial criminals usually tried to hide their activities, not document them so thoroughly. But Karen's documents showed a clear pattern of money laundering that was both sophisticated and strangely obvious. "What specifically made you suspicious?" Walsh asked Tamika. She came in angry about a loan denial, but she seemed to know exactly what she was going to do about it, like she'd planned the whole thing in advance. And she kept looking around the bank like she was memorizing details. That conversation launched the second phase of the investigation, one that would prove far more illuminating than the first. Agent Walsh began reviewing Karen's background with the same intensity that had been focused on Marcus Washington. What she found raised immediate red flags. Karen Whitmore had a history of complaints against businesses that had refused her requests. A restaurant that wouldn't accommodate her demands for a private dining area, a retail store that wouldn't accept her return of clearly worn merchandise, a contractor who wouldn't work for free after a payment dispute. In each case, Karen had filed official complaints, threatened lawsuits, or contacted regulatory agencies. But the Unity Community Bank case was different. This time, Karen hadn't just complained. She'd provided evidence, documents that seemed to show suspicious financial activity, bank records that appeared to document money laundering, transaction reports that suggested criminal activity. The problem was that forensic analysis was beginning to show that many of these documents had been altered or fabricated entirely. The revelation came on Monday morning, when the FBI's forensic accounting team completed their preliminary analysis of Karen's evidence. Agent Walsh stared at the report, feeling a familiar mixture of anger and embarrassment that came with realizing she'd been played. "The documents are sophisticated forgeries," explained forensic accountant Michael Torres. "Someone with substantial knowledge of banking procedures created fake transaction records, altered legitimate bank statements, and fabricated correspondence to make it appear as if the bank was processing illegal funds." "How sophisticated are we talking?" Walsh asked. "Professional level. This wasn't someone with a home computer and a copy of Photoshop. This was someone with access to banking software, knowledge of regulatory reporting requirements, and the technical skills to create documents that would fool investigators, at least initially." Walsh felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "Run a background check on Karen Whitmore. Employment history, education, professional associations, everything." The results explained everything. Karen Whitmore had worked for 15 years as a compliance officer for Regional Trust Bank, Unity Community Bank's largest competitor in the area. She had been laid off 8 months earlier during a corporate restructuring, but her severance package had included continued access to certain banking systems for consulting purposes. More damning, Karen's home computer showed evidence of accessing Unity Community Bank's customer database through security vulnerabilities that someone with her technical knowledge could have easily exploited. She had used legitimate customer information to create fake transactions, making her fabricated evidence appear authentic. But the most shocking discovery was still to come. Among Karen's personal files, investigators found a detailed plan labeled Market Disruption Strategy. The document outlined a systematic approach to destroying Unity Community Bank's reputation, triggering regulatory investigations, and creating market conditions that would benefit Regional Trust Bank. The plan had worked better than Karen could have imagined. By Tuesday of the second week, the financial contagion had spread to 6 other minority-owned banks. Regional Trust Bank's stock price had risen 23% as panicked customers shifted their deposits to what they perceived as safer, more established institutions. Agent Walsh made the arrest herself, arriving at Karen's suburban home with a team of federal agents at 6 in the morning. Karen answered the door in a silk bathrobe, her hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Karen Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, market manipulation, and filing false reports to federal agencies. For the first time since this whole saga began, Karen seemed genuinely surprised. I don't understand. I reported suspicious activity. I did my civic duty. Ma'am, we have evidence that you fabricated documents, illegally accessed computer systems, and deliberately provided false information to federal investigators with the intent to manipulate financial markets. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Karen's composure finally cracked. This is ridiculous. I was protecting the community from criminals. They're the ones laundering money, not me. But her protests carried no weight. The evidence was overwhelming, and Karen's lies were beginning to unravel as quickly as they had been constructed. The news of Karen's arrest spread even faster than the original fraud allegations had. By noon, news networks were reporting the stunning reversal in the Unity Community Bank case. Federal investigators now believe the bank was the victim of an elaborate fraud scheme designed to destroy its reputation and trigger a bank run, announced CNN's financial correspondent. The market response was immediate and dramatic. Unity. Financial Holdings' stock price recovered most of its losses within hours. Customers began calling to apologize and reopen their accounts. Community leaders who had distanced themselves from the bank began offering support and solidarity. But the damage couldn't be entirely undone. Several elderly customers had suffered heart attacks during the panic of the bank run. Small businesses that depended on Unity Community Bank for operating loans had been forced to close during the investigation. The broader financial contagion had cost minority-owned banks across the country millions of dollars in withdrawn deposits. Marcus Washington was released from federal custody on Wednesday afternoon. The charges against him formally dropped. He stood on the courthouse steps with Sarah Chen and their lawyer, facing a crowd of reporters and supporters who had gathered to hear his statement. This experience has been the most difficult of my life, he began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of exhaustion. Not just because of the false accusations, but because of what those accusations revealed about how fragile trust can be in our community. He paused, looking out at the crowd that included many of the customers who had demanded their money back just days earlier. We started Unity Community Bank because we believed our community deserved better. We believed that people who had been overlooked by traditional banking institutions deserved a place where they would be treated with respect and dignity. Sarah stepped forward to the microphone. What Karen Whitmore did wasn't just an attack on our bank. It was an attack on every person in this community who dared to believe that things could be different, that they could be better. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Marcus knew it would take much more than applause to repair the damage that had been done. Trust, once broken, was not easily rebuilt. The federal trial of Karen Whitmore began 3 months later. Prosecutor Janet Martinez painted a picture of calculated malice that shocked even seasoned court observers. The defendant didn't just file a false report. Martinez told the jury during her opening statement, she orchestrated a sophisticated fraud scheme designed to destroy a legitimate business and manipulate financial markets for personal and professional gain. The evidence presented during the trial revealed the full scope of Karen's deception. She had spent weeks researching Unity Community Bank's operations, studying their customer base, and identifying vulnerabilities in their systems. She had created dozens of fake documents, each designed to support her narrative of money laundering and criminal activity. Most damaging to Karen's defense was the Market Disruption Strategy document found on her computer. The plan explicitly outlined her intention to eliminate competitive threat from minority banking initiatives and restore market equilibrium to traditional institutions. Karen's defense attorney, Robert Morrison, tried to argue that his client had genuinely believed the bank was engaged in suspicious activity. Ms. Whitmore was acting on her professional instincts as a former compliance officer, he told the jury. She saw patterns that concerned her and reported them to authorities as she was trained to do. But the prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showed that Karen had purchased stock in Regional Trust Bank just weeks before making her false report to authorities. Phone records revealed conversations with former colleagues about Unity Community Bank's growth and competitive threat. Computer forensics proved that she had deliberately fabricated evidence rather than simply misinterpreting legitimate transactions. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned to the courtroom, Foreman William Hayes delivered a verdict that surprised no one who had followed the trial. Guilty on all counts. Judge Elizabeth Chen, no relation to Sarah, sentenced Karen Whitmore to 8 years in federal prison and ordered her to pay restitution of $47 million to Unity Community Bank and other affected institutions. Your actions didn't just harm a single business, Judge Chen told Karen during sentencing. You exploited racial tensions and economic fears to achieve your personal goals, causing panic and financial hardship for thousands of innocent people. Karen stood to hear her sentence with the same rigid composure she had maintained throughout the trial. But those who watched closely noticed that her hands were shaking as the bailiff led her away. The aftermath of the Unity Community Bank case rippled through the financial industry for months. Federal regulators implemented new procedures for investigating fraud allegations, requiring more thorough verification of evidence before taking enforcement action. Banking software companies strengthened security measures to prevent the kind of data theft Karen had committed. More importantly, the case became a catalyst for broader conversations about racial bias in financial services. Senator Williams's emergency hearings expanded into a comprehensive review of lending practices, regulatory enforcement, and the challenges facing minority-owned financial institutions. Unity Community Bank not only survived the crisis, but emerged stronger than before. The publicity, while initially devastating, ultimately brought national attention to their mission and services. Deposits from supporters across the country flooded in, far exceeding the amounts that had been withdrawn during the panic. Marcus and Sarah used the influx of capital to expand their operations, opening 2 additional branches and launching innovative programs to serve underbanked communities. They also established the Unity Community Foundation, which provided financial literacy education and small business loans to entrepreneurs who might not qualify for traditional financing. On the first anniversary of Karen's arrest, Unity Community Bank held a community celebration in the park across from their original branch. Marcus addressed the crowd that had gathered, many of them customers who had stood in line demanding their money back exactly 1 year earlier. This past year has taught us that trust is both fragile and powerful, he said. It can be shattered by lies, but it can also be rebuilt through truth, consistency, and genuine commitment to serving others. The celebration included live music, food from local restaurants, and activities for children. But the most meaningful moment came when Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who had been among the first to withdraw her money during the panic, approached Marcus with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry I doubted you," she said, pressing an envelope into his hands. "I've brought my grandson's college fund to open an account. I want him to grow up knowing that sometimes the right thing to do is trust people who are trying to make a difference." Inside the envelope was a check for $50,000 and a handwritten note from Mrs. Henderson's grandson. "Thank you for not giving up on our community, even when our community gave up on you." As the sun set over the celebration, Marcus stood with Sarah watching families enjoy the festivities. The ordeal that had nearly destroyed them had ultimately strengthened their resolve and deepened their connection to the community they served. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we just approved Karen's loan?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying the philosophical tone that often emerged during quiet moments like this. Marcus considered the question. "Sometimes. But then, I think about Mrs. Henderson's grandson, and all the other young people who are going to grow up seeing that it's possible to build something positive in this world, even when people try to tear it down." The evening ended with a fireworks display that painted the sky above Unity Community Bank in brilliant colors. Children pointed at the lights. Their parents explained the significance of the celebration, and the community that had been fractured by fear and misinformation began to heal. Karen Whitmore watched the news coverage of the anniversary celebration from her prison cell, the bitter taste of her choices settling deeper into her consciousness. The bank she had tried to destroy was thriving. The community she had tried to divide was stronger than ever, and she was exactly where her actions had inevitably led her. Her cellmate, reading over her shoulder, shook her head. "What were you thinking? Girl, all that for what?" Karen didn't answer, because the truth was too humiliating to admit even to herself. She had destroyed her own life out of spite, jealousy, and a worldview so narrow that she couldn't imagine success for others without diminishment for herself. The Unity Community Bank case became a landmark in financial fraud prosecution, studied in law schools and business schools as an example of how personal prejudice can lead to criminal behavior. But, for the people of the community, it became something much more important: proof that truth eventually prevails, that communities can survive attempts to divide them, and that institutions built on genuine service and integrity can weather even the most sophisticated attacks. Years later, when Marcus Washington was asked to speak at banking conferences about crisis management and community trust, he always ended his presentations with the same message: the greatest threat to progress isn't market forces or regulatory challenges. It's the willingness of individuals to destroy others rather than build themselves up. But communities that understand this, communities that choose construction over destruction, can overcome any obstacle. Unity Community Bank's motto, displayed prominently in every branch, captures the lesson learned from those traumatic weeks: built on trust, strengthened by truth, sustained by community. It's more than marketing copy. It's a promise forged in the crucible of crisis and proven through the test of time. The bank continues to grow, serving communities across 3 states and inspiring the creation of similar institutions nationwide. Karen Whitmore's attempt to destroy it had, paradoxically, demonstrated exactly why such institutions were needed and why they deserve to flourish. Justice, it turned out, was not just about punishment for those who chose destruction. It was about the triumph of those who chose to build, even when building was harder than tearing down, even when the foundations were repeatedly tested, even when the very people you served sometimes lost faith in what you were trying to achieve. In the end, that may be the most important lesson of all: that integrity, persistence, and genuine service to others create something stronger than any force arrayed against them. Unity Community Bank stands as proof that the arc of justice, while sometimes long and difficult to see, ultimately bends toward those who dedicate themselves to lifting others up rather than tearing them down.